Welcome to our beehiiv growth session for journalists. We're really excited to have you join us today. Thank you so much for spending your time with us on this Thursday. I'll introduce the guest here today. Jacob Wolf was the youngest newsroom person. I don't even want to butcher it. You say the accolades. He was the youngest person at ESPN hired as a journalist, I think.
Yeah, the youngest talent hire. They had some people early on that were like back of house studio folks that did other things and interns, but youngest full-time talent hire. So
There you go.
yeah.
He's a career journalist before jumping into the tech world. Covered gaming, I believe, for a time. Esports, is it, right?
Right.
Why am I trying to do this? You introduce yourself. Jacob, he's incredibly talented. He's a journalist by trade, so he's got the kind of best of both worlds to translate the newsletter world, working obviously with beehiiv in-house, and can also share more about the journalists. Give us your background, Jacob, for these folks.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Jacob Wolf. I'm a solutions engineer at beehiiv now, which if you're confused what that title means, I was too when I got it. But basically my department sits in between customer support and sales and the engineering team. And we do a little bit of those three things, supporting customers and their journey on the platform, helping engineering like scope out new features and implement those as well, and helping the sales team vet prospects beforehand and as they come in and what their technical needs might be once they join. But as EJ mentioned, I was a journalist for a decade. I started writing when I was 17 years old. I started my first full-time in journalism, or first full-time job in journalism at the Daily Dot when I was 18. I started at ESPN subsequently the year after at 19. I was there for almost 5 years, and thereafter eventually ended up independent. Was a part of the Substack Pro program, which some of you might be familiar with. So I was at Substack for a year. And at the end of the time of the year, I was like very frustrated with the platform and some of the limitations around its ability to integrate my other content from Spotify and YouTube and other places, and decided to start looking elsewhere. A media friend connected me with Tyler, the CEO of beehiiv. I fell in love with the platform, started sending on beehiiv, moved all my stuff over, and then eventually joined this team as an employee to help other journalists and other media folks integrate into the platform and grow their newsletters.
Amazing background and intro, Jacob. Super excited to have you here and providing that great context that really bridges those two worlds. My name is EJ. I'm the head of growth here at beehiiv. I've been with beehiiv coming up on 3 years in February as the first hire, joining the founding team about 3 months after the company released its initial product. So been there, done that, seen that. I have a connection with the solutions team and like the papa in some ways, and that I was on top of the different growth hats that I wore. Solutions engineering was one of my many hats that I wore early on before I was able to hand that off to the much more talented team that we have today. Super proud. Still get looped in sometimes to help, but they less and less need my assistance because they're total pros and love having them. Just so much value that Jacob would be able to provide. So I'm going to share my screen. We have in store for you today a nice hour and a half long session of basically how you can get up and running and started, soup to nuts, your newsletter growth strategy with beehiiv. So we're going to be covering this playbook for building sustainable media business through the lens of beehiiv, certainly, but we have a ton that we want to cover, a bunch of slides. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. I have a producer in my ear, so if I start talking or seeing that someone's talking to me and it's not Jacob, it's not the voices, it is the voices, but it's not in my head, it's in my ear. It's from Tony. But that is to say, Tony, if you wouldn't mind, if you could drop our link to the Q&A form, that'd be great. You guys can also drop it in the chat. He'll curate those for us, but it's really easy if you have questions. We have a Q&A form that makes it really easy to collect the questions that you have, so we can do that. But we'll have a more full service Q&A at the conclusion. But yeah, with that, we'll get started. I'll cover the agenda and then we'll jump into the content. So we've started with introductions. We'll start with our laying the groundwork section, which covers kind of the basics for newsletters. Now, if you've already started your newsletter, this may be a little bit redundant, but I find that there's almost always a little bit of value for everyone in the basics to make sure that you have all the bases covered. From there, we'll get into growing your media brand with organic tactics, ads and paid, and then the actual user experience through things like landing pages and conversion rate optimization. We'll touch on automations and the data structure that flows into beehiiv and that you can leverage to drive engaging, desirable email newsletters. And then lastly, we'll cover the various approaches to monetization that we support and that we see work best for journalists. And then, like I said, we will do the Q&A at the end. As far as resources, we will be recording this or are recording this. Everything so far is being recorded. And you'll receive the deck as well as the recording after this call. It usually takes a couple days for us to do the post-production and cleaning it up and everything. All of my ums and ahs and clumsy transitions and whatnot, we cut those out. So it's just straight, pure value. So with that, take a little sip of water real quick. What's better than water? Am I right? So laying the groundwork for success. Many of you probably know this, having worked in media before, but at the end of the day, media is all about finding your niche, understanding your audience, and knowing who your specific kind of audience is and how to speak to them. And really critically important, specifically with newsletters, when people are competing, when you're competing for people's attention in an inbox, is really understanding your niche. What is your reason for existence? What is the brand around that niche? What is your unique take? And along with that, who specifically are you reaching? And sometimes I split these into two parts. One is like finding your niche, and the other one's understanding your audience. I think it is valuable to have them split in two, so I'll cover them in two parts. But again, Jacob, jump in if somebody from a media background would find understanding a niche super second nature. But essentially, if you think about a niche, if you wanted to start writing about news related to the world of finance, there's so many different aspects of finance. If you just say, I'm going to write about finance, it's very broad. It is absolutely too broad, because not only do you have different areas of finance, you have investment banking, you have private equity, you have wealth management, you have the news around the people within those. It's just very broad. And when you go very broad like that, it's very hard for people to understand, is this relevant to me? The example I use for non-media folks is my girlfriend is pescatarian, gluten-free, and dairy-free. And so if I was to start writing a newsletter about nutrition, not a media newsletter, but about nutrition, if I just started writing about good nutrition, it would be very broad. What does that mean? There's people who think good nutrition means carnivore and keto, and different people think that nutrition only means being vegan and vegetarian. And I would necessarily have to niche down. And what I've discovered from dating this person is that when we meet people who are also pescatarian, dairy-free, and gluten-free, there's this like magic moment when they recognize each other and just realize that they have so much in common because of the restrictions that entails and the experiences of going out to eat and not having those restrictions met. And there's just a camaraderie and understanding that is immediately established. And so if I were to niche down from just broad nutrition to writing a newsletter, maybe it's recipes for pescatarian, gluten-free, and dairy-free people, not only would people who are seeking that kind of content or living that lifestyle immediately understand that this is for them, there's so much around that persona that I would immediately understand and be able to relate to. So finding that niche would really be a beacon for the audience. And then on my side, it would provide a very clear way for me to understand exactly who I'm talking to. You could break that audience down into a man or a woman, and then what are their experiences? What does their life cycle look like? What does their lifestyle look like? What does their day-to-day look like? What do they like to do for fun? All of these things basically come back to creating a very robust persona that helps you understand the needs, wants, and challenges that these people face. And in understanding those things, you can write content that provides value to them. This is such an important spot. I was going to stop to toss to Jacob. I'd love to hear your context on that.
I think two things that are interesting about this discussion in particular, when you think about like people who have worked in traditional media historically coming into this sort of independent entrepreneurial life too, of building a business around a newsletter. I think what you just said is really important, to think a little bit like a marketer and think about who your target audience is and who the type of person that consumes your content is, which is very second nature to, I think, what a lot of people have experienced that come from traditional media trying to do this. Because ultimately, a lot of us that worked in traditional media, we have people that did that for us. So we never had to worry about it really ever. We had the ability to just have a marketing department, people like you, EJ, and others who could just figure that out, and we just had to create and write content. And so it is a very different line of thinking, but a really helpful line of thinking who consumes your content or who might consume your content, and what is that target. The other thing too, though, is newsletters are a part of the bottom of the funnel. And I think that's really important just to call out here early as we get through this. Newsletters are a fantastic retention tool when you've built an audience somewhere and keeping them engaged. You have personal information about these people. Oftentimes their personal, you have their email. That's an extremely valuable piece of personal information to be able to reach them. You often can send out a survey and get their first name and their last name. I know we're going to dive into that a little bit later about personalization and segmentation, but really it is one of the forms of media that you can almost guarantee you're going to show up in someone's email inbox and be able to reach them. Unlike the algorithmic growth channels like Google and Twitter and other places historically that right now are dying as a way to grow people into news. It's really hard to attract people into news, and especially like aggregation, like Google is ripping out the bolts of Google News and using AI and other things to drive traffic to it and not to you. And all that to say, I think one thing that's really helpful to mention here earlier is to really hone in on what your unique perspective is in this beat, in the thing that you cover. Because if you go the traditional media route of just covering news as it happens, breaking news, especially if you're not the breaking news reporter breaking said news and you're just aggregating it or whatever, there's not a lot of value in that, because ultimately that's something people can find a bunch of other places. You need to have a unique perspective generally of some kind. And it doesn't have to be hot takes or whatever. It can be anything, but ultimately I think that's what the most successful newsletters written by independent media people have been, is that they have something unique that they can offer to their audience.
Couldn't say it better. And in that way, I think about things like, if you are covering if you're covering news in the way that kind of layman might think about it, it doesn't mean that your newsletter can't cover news and that you only need to be breaking news in order to cover news. But there's a lot of different ways that you can cover news in ways that kind of fit within this framework. You can do, for example, obviously local news is like a thing that is a thing, like Fox 45 or whatever. But like when I say local news, you can create a newsletter for your local area, and that basically niches down the topic of news to something that's more localized. Or you can do news, but specifically to a kind of very focused audience. So it's going to do news within like the moving and shaking of a specific segment of the market or of the audience. And in that way, again, when you start niching down, it becomes much more clear who that person is that you're trying to reach at the end of the day. La made a comment about so many jobs to learn and to do. And I don't want to make this sound like super intimidating, because it's not. I'd say that it's not, and it is. Obviously, undertaking a newsletter is an undertaking. It's something that you're committing your time to doing. And anything that is worth doing takes some time. But this process is not rocket science per se. I think media folks specifically will probably have a little bit of an easier time than maybe the average person thinking through this, because at the end of the day, media is all about creating content that reaches an audience, regardless of whether you've done this professionally and figure out who that audience is. When you're putting together a story, it's going to be read by somebody. And so you naturally have to know who this person is on the other side of the screen. So we'll get into more of that as we go, but it just can't be overstated how important it is. Understand a niche and how you fit in that. Are you doing something? And it doesn't have to be something that's never been done before. You could bring levity to it. You could write in a way that's engaging because it's more humorous, and makes something more approachable because of the way that you write. It can be much more technical. You could take something and really break out the component parts and just go, there's a news story. You could go and dive down and understand and explain what are the situation and conditions that cause this thing to happen. And there's an audience that might be interested in learning that at a deeper level.
You can really, more than anything, I think it's not going to be perfect on the first shoot. I think a newsletter is I covered people on YouTube that do YouTube stuff for a good part of my career. And I think about newsletters in a very similar fashion. A lot of very successful news or YouTube channels were one person or two people just like doing a thing. And it was like when they started it early on, it was very amateur and very unbuttoned, just doing the thing and doing it as well as they can with the resources that they had. Mm-hmm. And as it became successful and snowballed, they were able to, scale those things up, invest more money into it, invest more time into it, hire other people around them. It's the exact same thought process here, I
Yep.
think, generally.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
terribly different. And this may be a little bit not as familiar, but it's not terribly different than the process a startup goes through when you're trying to find what they call product market fit in the startup world. If you Google product market fit, it'll give you a lot deeper explanation of what that means if you're not familiar. But we refer to the topic with newsletters specifically as like content market fit, which is understanding just like that unique selling proposition that your end user is going to receive by reading it. And that takes some trial. It takes feedback. It takes reworking things a little bit in the beginning. But as starting at the newsletter, that's the one thing that your focus should be, is basically finding that content market fit where when you put something out, the feedback that you get is, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I can't believe I lived without it. And as a result, you start to see organic growth occurring, people sharing it without being prompted to. And that's like really what lays the groundwork for growth. And so that's why this conversation is so important. The second step we'll move into is publishing consistently. This is not going to be foreign to anybody in this call with a media background, but if you can imagine the New York Times didn't publish, you just got an irregular schedule. It's okay, Monday comes around and you don't know whether they're going to publish an edition. It's okay, didn't really have the story ready, so we're gonna just publish for the first time this week on Wednesday. No, that wouldn't work. With consistency that you're going to get the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I don't know. There's probably even a Saturday and Sunday edition. I know there's Sunday for a lot of them, but it's like you come to expect that. And so consistency really is key. If you're going to ask people to give you their email address, which takes a decent amount of trust in today's day and age, where it's like they don't want to waste their time getting spam or getting content that's not relevant to them, you need to reward that trust with consistency so they know what they can expect. And that consistency builds trust. So by no means do you have to start a daily newsletter. It's very difficult to have that content production at a daily level, especially if you're a solo. But a weekly or bi-weekly can be fine. I'd say no less than bi-weekly. A lot of folks might say no less than weekly, but a weekly is perfectly attainable. It's just important that when you make that commitment to yourself, that you keep that commitment to yourself and to your readers and publish on that cadence. So you say, okay, we're going to send every week at Thursday at 9 a.m. Just that's the deadline. That's the one you got to hit. And that's where I say I think it's probably not too foreign for media folks to have that deadline kind of concept. And so I'm not going to stick around and talk about that too much. The last thing is I touched on in the first point is collecting feedback from your best subscribers. It's important. The reason why you need to know your audience and being published, you need to be knowing your audience, knowing your niche, and publishing consistently so that you can collect that feedback from the folks that you know are part of that target audience and that can give you the feedback to improve your craft. And so if you don't know who that audience is, then all feedback looks like good feedback. But if, for example, there was a person I was talking to on a call yesterday who targets specifically adults who are married with kids and are taking care of aging parents, and it's a very specific niche. And so if they get feedback from their newsletter from somebody who's single and whose parents are in great health, they're going to start making content that is completely irrelevant to the people that they're trying to reach. And so we say your best customers, once you know who your users are, making sure that you're optimizing for collecting that feedback and implementing that feedback from the folks who are opening all of your newsletters or close to all of your newsletters, who are within that audience that you're trying to fill. So if you're writing to a niche of, again, we'll use the finance example, niche finance professionals, you want to make sure that the feedback that you might be collecting and following up on and indexing for are those users and not the undergrad finance student who is a Gen Alpha person who is not who you're trying to influence. So with this, we provide a bunch of tools to do all of these things really well and frameworks for doing all of that. But just successful newsletters are based on kind of unique value, understanding their audience, publishing consistently, and continuous feedback and improvement. So from there, we'll move on to our section on growth. So first one, social media is going to be invariably one of your strongest distribution channels. There's only a limited number of ways in which you can take something that exists integrally within either a website or a inbox and get it in front of eyeballs. And certainly it's not the only one, but it is, of course, one of the biggest ones, the most pervasive and continuously changing, as we've seen with the whole thing about TikTok this Sunday. The key to maximizing your follower engagement and to building an audience on social is to test. Now, many of you who are in the media space may have some followings. If you have a newsroom that's like elevated your profile and you have people that may trust you, this is you're ahead of the curve here. If you're just starting out, it's really important that you just continuously test what works and what your audience responds to. The key here that relates to the groundwork, because everything is going to relate to groundwork, is that it doesn't matter necessarily where you want to post or like to post. The key is understanding where your audience spends their attention and building a native presence there. If your folks are these finance professionals and none of them are on X, but a lot of them are on LinkedIn, for example, then it may make sense to focus your attention on cracking the algorithm for LinkedIn versus X. Even if you like X and it's like where you feel very comfortable, if your audience just isn't there, it's going to be the wrong place to invest time, most likely. And so with that, where you're supposed to be in terms of creating content, the next step is then to, again, similar to what you're doing with the newsletter in itself, is to test to understand what type of content engages your target audience, what they respond to, what's going to get them to share, what's going to get them to content or to comment. All of these things give signals back to the these platforms that then are going to get wider distribution. Wider distribution means more eyeballs, which means more people checking out your newsletter and either following you on the platform or subscribing. One of the ways that you can do this if you have no following and are starting from scratch is responding simply to comments and DMs, or commenting on people's posts and engaging otherwise, whether it's a comment. This is really powerful because it signals that you are related to whatever they're trying to post about and gets you visibility. Everybody, for the most part, sees people when they comment. Maybe to a lesser degree, but many people see when you like something. You obviously are very visible to other people when you like and comment. And so by providing value within comments, you signal to the broader audience and broader market that you are somebody who is an aspiring or an authority, an aspiring authority or an authority in a certain space. One of the ways to further generate engagement on social to get your profile up is to use things like interactive content, whether it's polls, Q&As, questions, prompts, all of these things that are going to invite communities to share their opinion. And it may not be self-serving, but the point is to be actually the opposite of self-serving. You want to be giving in these free channels. And once you've built that authority, once you've built that trust with audiences, and only at that point is when you might ask or have a post that's going to request a subscription. Optimally, you don't necessarily ever have to even ask for a subscription. You just have your link to the newsletter in your bio. People vibe with what you're saying, trust what you're saying, trust you as an authority, and want to seek out that knowledge. Those are going to be your best subscribers. But at the end of the day, we'll get into some of the more tactics around driving that growth and basically encouraging people to give you their subscription in return for something. That's that. Second, very popular concept is using kind of repurposing content. And there's definitely a time and a place for that and a way to do that. What some people are tempted to do is just to take the thing that they posted on TikTok and just take the exact same thing and repost it on X or repost it directly on LinkedIn. And that doesn't work. That's not an approach you want to take. The key is to understand the native formats that your platform encourages and drives engagement through and mold your content into that. So not saying to not repost and to reformat content, but you need to do it in a way that's smart. And I think I might have mentioned this at the beginning, but if you have the option of working across multiple platforms or really focusing on one, nearly all the time, I guess the exception probably proves the rule, it's better to focus on a single platform and get to know that platform really well inside and out before you expand to other platforms, or if you ever expand to other platforms. And so in that way, by focusing all of your attention, you can really get to know what works, what's valuable to users, what they jive with, and what is going to create that excitement. And at the end of the day, you're fostering your community through conversation, consistent content, and that engagement. I say the last thing before I toss it to Jacob, one of the insights that I got from one of my guests in a previous webinar was pretty salient in that if you're publishing a newsletter weekly, you have one opportunity a week to test and collect feedback. With social media, not only is it free, but there's no limits on how often you can post. And within reason, it's the perfect playground to really test and understand what messages and what tones and different tones of voices and different types of content really work for your audience. And you can take those learnings and then apply them to the newsletter, whether it's, again, that tone, types of content, types of analysis. For example, if you're going super deep and unpacking and unthreading the story, going super deep on a topic, you can do something very similar if you're on LinkedIn or X with either a thread where you say, here's the headline, here's the story, here are the component parts that created the conditions for the story. And maybe your newsletter goes into that depth. LinkedIn, similar, you can do a more in-depth post in terms of text. You could do like a slideshow gallery. Maybe each slide shows elements of the different threads that led to the current point, or maybe a video. You can also do a video. Jacob, how does this sound to you? I know you're active on social, have been for a very long time across a great number of subjects. I see all of your tweets because I follow all of the beehiiv tweets, and I'd say you do a really great job. You really have a unique voice and cover a lot of different topics. So I know you're native to a few different platforms. What's your advice here?
I think the biggest thing that I learned really early in my career, and it wasn't like necessarily calculated, but it was really helpful for helping me find my voice and my audience during my time in journalism, was being personable. I think a lot of the other people that I worked alongside in digital media were the only tweets and posts you would see from them were when there was like a piece of news they were covering or giving commentary on or whatever. And there was nothing about, you didn't know anything about them. I used to call them sort of news robots. You just tweet about a piece of news or tweet about an event or whatever and move on, and nothing about them as people. And I think for a certain audience, maybe an older audience, that's all they want. They just want to follow people and just get that content, like just the content. But I think what's really helpful is when you're a real life human being and just show your interest and wear your heart on your sleeve a little bit. Because I think younger people in particular, depending on what you cover, really do attach to, and we called it in my time covering the creator economy, like parasocial relationships, but they really do attach to the ability to relate to you in one way or another. Mm-hmm. And so just being yourself and sharing your interest and your passion about the thing that you're writing about in your newsletter or covering generally in your content is really helpful. And I mean, think it seems so basic, and it was so basic for me as someone who's Gen Z and posted like that way before I was a journalist. It was very easy, and I've walked backwards into it without meaning to, but it's really important, I think, for people in independent media in particular to feel like, okay, this is someone that isn't detached from me. They're not just someone on my screen. They are like a real person that me has a life and interest, and they're a human, and that makes me feel more connected to them. And it helps you feel more connected to their content as well. And so I definitely, but I think that's also a little bit antithetical to what you're taught in journalism school and like what it's like to be in a traditional newsroom. I would say if you are coming from that background, the best thing you can do for yourself is relearn what you were taught without jeopardizing your ethics and everything else. But more, I don't think this is really an ethical dilemma. I think it's just be yourself and just be a human being on social media, and it goes a really long way.
Perfectly said. I think the slide is like, be yourself, be a human being. That's what people engage with. That's what people want more of in the world of bots and AI in this world, but especially now more than ever, being a real person. I think that there's a premium to be placed on that. Said. Moving next, converting followers to subscribers. So you're maximizing your engagement by being that real person. So how do we then create content that is going to work well for achieving the goals that we're setting for ourselves in terms of building the actual newsletter? One is, you see very commonly what we call in the marketing world a call to action. You may call it something similar in the media world. I'm not sure. So if it's familiar, forgive me. But having a call to action, something where, at the conclusion of a post or a conclusion of the content you're writing, have a next step. There's this principle where, certainly in digital media, where you never want a user to question or not know what to do next. And I would say digital media in terms of like marketing and design, you should always have a path for a user to take a next step. When you hit a roadblock, like a dead end, is the worst thing you can do, because then the user is going to bounce and you've lost that attention. And when a user reaches the end of your post, if you've been successful with your messaging and engaging and activating their attention and interest, having a call to action can provide that outlet for them to say, okay, cool, you've activated me. I'm feeling super fired up and passionate about whatever I've just read. I'm now going to click this link or this, call to action to now follow through and take a next step. Second, one of the really useful things you can do with social media is use it to create things like social proof and testimonials. You'll have people who, as you create your content, will share it, comment on it. These are perfect opportunities to engage those users. One, if they've really liked your content, and provide some commentary on it. There's two ways you can leverage this. One would be obviously engaging with it and showing that you're listening and you're there and you're a real human behind the screen. That's going to signal to other people that, again, you're that real human being who cares. But the other thing you can do is use that in some of your other marketing. If you're running eventually ads, which we'll get into, or content on your actual site where your content is hosted, if people have valuable, good things to say about what you're creating, it's a very powerful signal for other people to follow suit. And so you can ask for quotes, you can retweet, your repost, and these basically signal to other people that your content's worthwhile, and you'll get more subscribers that way. Again, we talk about creating content, but then every once in a while creating some sort of piece that's going to drive with a call to action. One way to do this is to tease some exclusive content before you actually post it. So this might be you have a big story coming out, or you have your next newsletter coming out on Thursday. Wednesday morning, you create a hook, which is just basically something that grabs attention, asks a question, makes a bold statement, and then you follow it with saying, we're going to cover that and a bunch more in tomorrow's newsletter edition. Make sure you subscribe so that you get to see it first. As we discussed before, link to your newsletter in bio. If you have a link in bio tool, if you have a slot within the social profile, link to it there. LinkedIn allows you to do this. Instagram allows you to do this. Twitter allows you to do this. There's pretty much every platform allows you to have at least one or more links that you can get users to who want to take that action and learn more about you. And then I think we'll get into this a little bit more in terms of how to actually create these and what these mean. But one of the most powerful concepts that will be a recurring theme here is the idea of what we call a lead magnet. And this is very much a marketing concept that is likely going to be new. But the key to a lead magnet is basically an asset of some sort. It can be a video, it can be a document, it can be literally anything of value that you can essentially trade with your future subscriber. They give you your email, they get this value. That's not necessarily the newsletter itself. That's obviously a normal subscription. So that is to say, maybe we'll use this finance media example. You're working in the finance beat and you have some sort of you've done a bunch of research about this industry to write your story. So you have this content that may not be useful for a specific story, but you've committed your time, you've built this repository of stuff. You can take that and, depending on your angle, turn that into some sort of asset. So maybe you've researched a bunch of companies in a specific industry, and you have either structured data or unstructured data, or you have a report that you've built. You can basically take this research and package it and basically say, hey, if you want this report or this special content that would be valuable to you, you can have it for free. You just have to subscribe to the newsletter, or you just have to enter your email and that subscribes into the newsletter. You're going to be very clear and transparent on they're going to be subscribed to the newsletter, but it's a way to identify your audience, and that somebody who is irrelevant to what you're doing is not going to necessarily want that piece of content. And so they're not going to take you up on it. But the people who are your key kind of focused audience, they're going to jump at that opportunity if it's done correctly. And in doing so, will become a subscriber. Jacob, I would love your perspective real quick on how some of these things jive with, you mentioned personal integrity and ethics. And I think sometimes media feels a little bit disconnected from these growth tactics, and that journalists may be writing and they're putting it out there, and whatever the user wants to do on the other side, that is up to them, because you're the messenger. You're not an arbiter, so to speak. How do these things jive, and how can we maybe make them make a little bit more sense, or kind of align them with people's values?
Yeah, I think also it's a good idea to give a hard example of what one of these things looks like. Our CEO, Tyler, writes a newsletter called Big Desk Energy that is his personal journey as an entrepreneur and the lessons that he's learned along the way, and starting beehiiv and running beehiiv, and recently started a new lead magnet campaign that is focused around our Series B deck that we used last year to raise $33 million. And that one, and he's basically, if you get a certain number of referrals, he's giving you access to that. And that's a great sort of lead magnet to incentivize people to share your newsletter, etc. Because, and he knows it's very strategically fit, because a lot of his readers are other entrepreneurs that maybe they're trying to raise money and they're trying to understand how companies like us have done that. And again, really understanding, as we said at the top of the hour, that audience, your target audience, and what they're interested in and what they would find valuable. I think he's really cornered that. So that's a great example of that. In terms of what a journalist could potentially do, one journalist that I really enjoy his work when he was more active writing and less doing production stuff, which he does now, is Shay Serrano. He wrote about basketball and culture and other things. And Shay used to do biannual ebooks, small ebooks about various different things. He wrote a thing about The Office at one point in time. It just understood his audience, knew what they'd be interested in, and write these things that he enjoyed doing. those are great. Things like that are like, they take some time to build, obviously, but as a growth tactic, I think they're very well aligned. If you write about, if we keep going back to finance, because I think it's like an easy example, but if you like write about finance, maybe you have a white paper of like how you think about the economy or you think about investment. And maybe that's your lead magnet, right? Maybe that's the thing that you sign up for my newsletter and you get access to this. And I've seen people do that and it be really successful. So I don't think it's necessarily like dangling something weird in front of people. I think you can very much find something that is very mission aligned with the type of work you do and compile it and put it together and share it with people. And I think that works really well if you understand your audience. I think we're going to keep coming back throughout this webinar on understanding your audience. It's the biggest thing I would challenge anyone with a traditional media background to do, is really sit there and think, who are the people that consume my content if you have an existing audience? And then really drilling down to, okay, how do I make those people become newsletter subscribers? And that is those two things are really the biggest thought exercise you can do for yourself as you think about how to grow a newsletter.
Very well said. Sorry. Cool. Moving on to collaborating for list building. And I was going to actually address that question from the chat. Yeah. Sorry. That's me talking to the producer, not the made up voices. So I see a question from Michael about repackaging newsletter into social media content. I believe we are going to cover this. Now, Tony, you can look ahead. If I look ahead, it's going to preview stuff, but confirm this for me, Tony, and I'll just nod. But I think we're going to cover this later in the deck around some of the different topics that we're going to cover in terms of repurposing and like creating content. But if we're not, I will cover this before we move to the next section. But basically, yeah, creating content. In short, creating content and repackaging newsletter content into social media content is a great idea. Obviously gives people a great preview into what they can expect from the newsletter, and also is in that same vein of repurposing and it is repurposing. When we talk about different channels, like your newsletter is just one channel, repurposing content from your newsletter into social is a great idea, as we said before. And so in this case, you will do very well to basically use that to simplify some of your workflows. Cool. Collaborating for list building. So this is actually something I think that, again, compared to perhaps new newsletter builders who are non-media folks, that collaboration is probably something that's comes a little bit more naturally. Jacob, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think that the idea of basically working with somebody on a story, working with the team in a newsroom is probably pretty, I don't want to say necessarily second nature, but it's like much more, you're a place that maybe you're more comfortable than the person who maybe is starting from solo and hasn't worked with folks in this kind of capacity and producing content. So there's a couple different ways that we look at this through beehiiv specifically and how we recommend for building a newsletter. The first is partnering with other creators. And so there's a couple different ways you can do this within beehiiv. There's our recommendations network through our platform. Of course, there's other tools out there that also have recommendations networks where you can identify newsletters and other creators that may align with your audience. I'd say when you're looking at partnering with other creators, the key here is to understand who aligns with my audience, that who's complementary to my audience, like that we're not going to cannibalize each other or compete with each other, that we can both provide similar value to. And so in this case, again, going back to the finance example, because it's super easy, if you were writing a finance news, if you're like a liquidity type person, you're writing about finance news that's just like what's happening on Wall Street, you may partner with a crypto newsletter and an AI newsletter, the intersection of finance and tech in terms of AI and the intersection of Web3 and finance with crypto. If you are focused on the news, you're not going to be competing with a crypto newsletter that's providing separate value around this specific part of the market. And you're not going to be competing with AI, which is a separate part, separate than finance, but your audience likely overlaps in terms of the people who are interested in those topics. And in that way, you can find newsletters that align in that way and potentially form a collaborative partnership. And so what format does that take? What does that actually look like in practice? And so this is where beehiiv has some great tools. We have our recommendations tool where you can literally pop a check mark in your beehiiv account. And when a subscriber subscribes, they will see these other recommendations show up. Now, this is specific. You can see the sponsor button. This is for our boosts feature, but the organic recommendations look identical, except they just don't have the sponsored button. But essentially, this screen is shown to users once they subscribe if you have some recommendations set up where you can tell users why you recommend this other newsletter and give them the opportunity to subscribe. Another way would be doing something more like a swap with a tool like Magic Links, where we integrate with 14 other platforms, so they don't have to be on beehiiv, where you could say, hey, I will write a little blurb about your newsletter in my next edition, if you write about mine and you provide a link for your users to subscribe to my newsletter, and I'll provide a link for yours to subscribe to mine. Our Magic Links feature allows that to be a one-click interaction. Makes it super simple. We have documentation on that. I won't get into the details of the specific mechanisms, but it's just literally a one-click on the link and the user is subscribed. Beyond kind of these more kind of passive, collaborative recommendation type of interactions, you can do things like joint webinars or events or even lead magnets. One of the things we do with a lot of folks is we have agency partners that we work with from a perspective of beehiiv that they are trying to reach newsletter publishers the same way we are, except we're trying to reach them for the platform. They're trying to reach clients so that they can actually build ad campaigns and stuff. But it's a very similar audience. And so we partner with some of these agencies. They create lead magnets to reach newsletter publishers. And so we basically partner with them and say, hey, we will share any leads that come through this lead magnet, but you've already created it. You've already tested it. You know that it works really well. We will pay to get this in front of more people, and we share the leads that come from that. And we're obviously very upfront that you're sharing your information with both parties, but there's no need for us to necessarily reinvent the wheel. Everybody wins, and we're able to do more with less as a small team. And so if you have somebody maybe who's really good at events and you're more of like maybe somebody has a YouTube channel and you have a newsletter, you can work with them to say, hey, I'll come onto your show and I'll write about you in my newsletter, and you can swap and have a joint Worlds Collide event like that. Lastly, there's affiliate and referral programs. So we can include the affiliate as our recommendations tool, where the sponsored indicates that if you were to recommend, in this example, Big Desk Energy is going to pay you a fee for that referral. And for FCC regulations, we obviously have the sponsored badge here. So it's very clear that this is a paid rep relationship, but it's a way for not only this collaboration to occur, but if you're on the side that's paying for growth, you can basically scale that up. Or if you're on the monetization side, you can use it to subsidize your newsletter. We also, of course, famously have our referral program, which is built in to the platform. And if you have a subscriber who is a creator or an influencer, it's very easy for them to take their referral program link and they can share it. And basically, they get credit for anybody that subscribes with that link. So collaboration doesn't necessarily have to be like just trades or two-sided value. In the end of the day, it's all two-sided value, but it doesn't have to be like tit for tat with a subscriber passing back and forth. You can say, hey, like I will reward you for anybody that you're able to pass my way. And again, all of this is above board, very clear to the end user, so it's ethical. Jacob, I suspect that maybe some of those later ones around the recommendations and that sort of thing, maybe a little bit less familiar to some of our journalist folks, but what are your thoughts around collaboration and what I've just said?
Yeah, I think maybe you mentioned partnering with other creators and using the newsroom example. I think that one makes a lot of sense to me, and something I did throughout my career was partnering through the latter half of my journalism career where I was independent, was collaborating and writing stories with other people, etc., and publishing on both platforms. So I think that's really helpful to expose yourself to a different audience because they probably have a different audience than you do. Yeah, I don't really have a ton of like other thoughts about recommendations generally. Okay. I think they're really helpful just because, especially when you find people that, again, hearkening back to think about your audience a lot. If you think about other journalists who may have some overlap with your audience as well, or their audience may have interest in your stuff based off what they create, reaching out and proactively doing that. I did that a lot during my independent time, both on Substack and on beehiiv, and it definitely proved to be really valuable generally. I would say, thinking about this, I think the biggest sort of overall theme that we've been touching on here, and this slide gets to more deeply, is that you can't just write and expect people to show up. Like, you got to find other ways to build your audience. And I think this is a really helpful way of doing so.
I do want to double click on that. I know we're a little short on time, so I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. But before I do that, I do want to touch on something you just said that is something that's like a very key differentiator between us and Substack. And maybe when I do this in the future, I'll lead with that. You said there's some work that goes into kind of building these audiences and building these different growth channels. And one of the big differences between us and Substack is how we handle that responsibility. With the example I use with folks is that if you think about Shopify, and Amazon is a place where if you wanted to start selling something, you could today. All the buyers are already there. So you can start up a page, you get a buy box, and if you have the right price, you're going to start immediately making sales. What you're not doing is learning who your audience is, how to engage them, those skills, you're not gaining skills that are cross applicable or that are accretive to you as a business owner, other than I found a widget on Alibaba and I was able to set it at a price that was lower than everybody else. On the other side, you have Shopify, where you can set up your own store. It's the foundation. They make that part really easy to give you the foundation and the pipes and everything, the distribution of like how you show your products and take in orders and stuff like that. But what they don't do for you is basically spoon feed you those buyers. And so that part is up to you to understand who is your audience, how do I engage them, what are the elements of my product that are going to get them to actually purchase. And that's not as simple. It's not as not worry free. It's not quite as just like effort free. It takes more work. And that kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning. It's anything worth doing kind of takes that effort. The value, though, is that as you go through that process, you are gaining skills. You are gaining accretive talent and value that, one, for your business is then creating intrinsic value as a brand. You can then sell potentially a media brand or a company. You don't see companies that are Amazon only brands being sold because there's not value inherent to the company, but you do see Shopify brands selling. And so where we really sit is I really make the comparison between, in a metaphor, between Amazon and Shopify. Neither one's going to put the other one out of business. They serve kind of different types of, in this case, business owners, but I really compare us to Substack in that way, where it's like, if you just want to post your words and have them seen by random people, and that's the extent, then that is the type of person that is going to find a lot more success with beehiiv, or with Substack. If you want to build a brand that you own and an audience that you control, that's not going to be siphoned off to a third-party app or locked into a social network and up to the whims of that algorithmic situation, you really want to own that audience and build something that has intrinsic value, then beehiiv is the place for you. And that's really the main difference. So you own every aspect of your brand with beehiiv. You're learning these skills that are then cross-applicable to any area of marketing and life and business or media and whatnot. And so I think that in the future, maybe that's a great thing to lead with, because I think a lot of people with that, the feedback I've gotten is that metaphor is pretty accessible, but it can be helpful. And I'm just riffing on what you were saying about the value of these skills and the value of building these relationships and whatnot. So I'm going to, we have a couple more slides here. As you can see in the thing, we're about 8 through 21. So I'm going to pick up the pace just a little bit. If there's questions that come up that are things that aren't self-explanatory that I'm maybe covering too lightly, that'll be the perfect example of how we can drop in the chat some Q&A. And at the end, we can go back into those and dive a little bit deeper. So with that, we're going to talk about ads and paid methods. Everybody's seen ads on social media. They're one of the easiest ways to grow a business, to grow a newsletter. You can scale them up, you can scale them back. All it takes is money and targeting. And so just like most other businesses, social media ads are incredibly valuable. The different places we see people running social ads are typically Instagram, Facebook, some on TikTok, some on Twitter or X, and some on YouTube. It's obviously more of a visual, like video type platform, but you're going to see mostly on kind of those meta properties where it's like a very direct response focused platform. And TikTok, again, we don't know where TikTok's going, but that's been a valuable platform. The other place that's non-social is going to be places like Google Ads, where through search ads, you can target exact search queries that people are looking for. So if they're looking for finance newsletter, you can show your ad for that specific search so that the person who's searching for that is looking for your service. Native advertising, this is probably, again, very familiar with media, is going to be an ad that looks like a piece of native content that has been sponsored and is actually an ad. This is one of the ways that some publications like Forbes or Business Insider support elements of their business. You can pay for an article that basically is going to be under their letterhead or masthead, and it's going to look like a news story, but it's going to be about whatever who's paying for it. Paid sponsorships, we talked about that with Boosts, but you can also do other types of paid sponsorships where instead of paying for a specific recommended subscriber, you could say, hey, I want to sponsor your newsletter. So it's sponsored by your newsletter. And then maybe there's a blurb and you pay a flat fee for that to reach somebody else's audience. But at the end of the day, for all of these different verticals, the key is really matching the audience that you're trying to target with compelling creative, which is what we're saying when we say creative. It's going to be the content of the ad. So whether that's visual, whether that's text, whether it's a combination of imagery or video and text, just making sure that the text is compelling and is identifying the right users and is making the right users take action. In this example here to the right, this is probably going to be one of the more foreign areas to traditional media folks, but in this case, Creator Spotlight is a publication that focuses on telling stories from the creator economy. They want people who are creators, who are building audiences, who are ideally between 10 and 100K or aspiring to get to that level. And this hook up here is what creators with 10 to 100K followers know that you don't. So it's like creating some curiosity. It's creating a little bit of FOMO. What do they know that I don't if I'm that aspiring person? But it's very clear on who this is trying to target. And then it's providing some value. So it's like providing 3 ways that they can, 3 things that you might not know that these big creators do. And then it's saying, if you want more of these insights, which of course, if you're in part of that audience, you almost certainly do, sign up for this newsletter. And so in that case, it's doing a really great job of identifying the target audience, presenting a message, and driving action. Jake, do you have any feedback on this part? We can move on.
Yeah, nothing crazy on this. I think, advertising super second nature to people in media.
Great.
Generally.
Okay.
So yeah,
I guess that makes sense. You're around it all the time, even if they're not specifically doing ads. Yeah, advertising is super common.
Just got to think about how you do it versus seeing other people do it. But you certainly see it all the time. It's just like how to reshuffle that to work in your favor.
Yeah. So moving along that journey, we've talked about social media and how to acquire, get in front of people. We've talked about ads and how to drive that traffic and get people. The last step before a sign up is the actual experience that a user is going to go through when they actually go to sign up. And so optimizing the sign up experience or the conversion experience is critical for success. It's, again, doesn't have to be terribly complicated. You can see this landing page here on the right is fairly simple. It's got a headline. It's got a sign up form. And so where we say analytics are really important here. This is going to be one of those skills that you may want to learn a little bit, just very surface level, just to say, okay, if I had 100 people land on this page, how many subscribers signed up? And if they had 6 divided by 100, you have a 6% conversion rate. That's super low. You're probably going to hit somewhere between 25 and 45%. So if you send 100 people to your landing page, you really want to if you send 100 people to the landing page, you want roughly 35, a third to half of them to actually sign up. And you do that by making sure that you have compelling copy that explains your value proposition. In this case, the Neuron is the name of the newsletter. Make AI work for you. So that's like the end state. And then it gives a little bit more support to that statement. And then, of course, there's just this one simple call to action: submit your email and get this content. You can see here, minimal fields, just there's one decision. There's not name, first name, last name, date, birth, all those things. It's just email. You can collect that additional information on the back end. But if somebody is put off by asking for multiple fields, then you end up with nothing versus ending up with at least an email that you can contact them with. Again, compelling copy, visual appeal. It's very clean, using motifs of the logo and everything all over the place. And again, the placement and timing of when you send people to this page is super important. If you are just dropping a link with no context on your X feed, not likely to have too many people go there. But if you have a thread where it's like you've explained a concept, and at the very end of it say, if you want deeper insights like this, click here to sign up, they're going to be primed and ready to hit that subscribe button, submit their email, and subscribe. And there's that. What's not shown here is our ability to include testimonials. Social proof can be really useful for convincing people, saying, hey, I'm just like you and I love this newsletter and you will too. It's like the process that people go through. Awesome. So the next sections should go much quicker because we're going to go, it's a little bit more just heads up. This is what you need to look for and do when you go through these things rather than kind of practice. Or growth is more, these are the things you actually need to internalize and do more of. This is what's available to you on beehiiv. We do have a question. Do you suggest setting up so people need to first submit email to see content or rather provide content without subscription? What it comes down to, and I'd love Jacob to chime in here, because you see this all the time in traditional media where it's like New York Times famously, it's you see this great headline, you want to learn more, you hit their site and they're like, you can't see it unless you subscribe for $1 a month or whatever it is. I think it really comes down to how unique and how valuable your information is to your audience. And that obviously depends on who the person clicking is. To me, I always see an exciting headline. I click the New York Times link and then I'm like, oh man, I'm not going to pay for this. Like, I'm just not going to read this article. And then I bounce. But that doesn't mean that everybody does that. That certainly means that there are people where it is valuable or important enough to them that they will be compelled to pay to see something. Publications that tend to be more technical or more unique in terms of the knowledge being provided tend to do better with that gating process, because at the end of the day, if it's a free newsletter and you're just requiring an email address, it's a pretty low bar for somebody who really wants to see what you have to offer. If you're doing something that's a little bit more kind of mass media, probably going to perform a little bit worse because most mass media things are supposed to be more general, more lighter in terms of the touch and lighter in terms of people's desire to see them. So if you put that gate there, if it's something that's less focused, they're more likely to bounce. Jake, what do you have? What do you have there?
Yeah, I think it really does boil down to, God, we keep coming back to this because it's so important, but it does boil down to who your audience is and how successful these things are. On Beehive, we have the ability to just like email gate, where all they got to do is put in their email and then that's it. You were talking about that, Michael, and you were asking about that. That is really helpful just generally because you're not asking people to pay you money, but obviously we also have the ability to do like subscriber breaks and true real paywalls where people do have to pay you to access the content. I think historically in traditional media, like trade magazine, trade publication type folks have done really well in the paywall side of things because their consumers tend to be a little bit more sophisticated professionals who can write this off as a business expense. I think when I'm say something like that, the Wall Street Journals of the world, Sports Business Journal, The Information, these people that really high value if you're a professional working in Silicon Valley or Wall Street or whatever, and you want information that's reliable from really good reporters, and you can also write that off on your taxes. That is like a big thing to just be like, all right, take the credit card, put the money down. And I see that too in independent newsletters where that's really successful if that's your target demo is the executive type. I always really personally struggled with this in my career because I always wanted to write for the masses, but it is hard to do that when you also have to pay your bills because ultimately not everyone's going to be able to pay you or have the spare funds to pay you, but I'm still a believer that they should have access to that information, especially if it's unique and valuable information that you have some unique insight on that your competitors don't, frankly. So it is a hard balance. I think email gating is less offensive and easier for your subscribers, obviously. And there is other ways you can monetize our ad platform, et cetera, that gives you the ability to do that and leverage that and still make some amount of revenue off of that. But yeah, it is a hard balance trying to figure it out. And it is extremely audience dependent in terms of like how successful you'll be with each one of those things.
Makes sense. Yeah. So it comes down to really depends. Andrew, FYI, one of the value props of page one is that we get around those paywalls at the New York Times. Okay, cool. That's good to know. That's something that's certainly something to lead with your audience. So moving into automations and data, just in terms of, this should be pretty quick. Key newsletter metrics to track: open rate, number of people who are opening divided by the number of sends; click-through rate, people have clicked out of the people who have opened; conversion rate, number of people who viewed a landing page and then signed up; unsubscribe rate, number of people who opened an email and then from it; spam rate, number of people who were delivered an email and then clicked as marked as spam; growth rate, the rate of change over time of your subscriber list. So if you have 100 subscribers and then a week later you have 110, it's 10 more subscribers. 10 divided by 100 is 10%. Your growth rate is 10% over that 7-day period. Revenue per subscriber, the amount of money you're making divided by your total number of subscribers. These are all key rates in some ways to track. We track all of these within the platform in different places, but each of them can help tell a story about the health of either posts or your newsletter as a whole. So open rate, click-through rate, unsubscribe rate, spam rate is like a post-specific or post-specific metrics. Conversion rate, growth rate, revenue per subscriber are more broad business kind of level metrics. And we'll move here. So analyzing subscriber behavior. So what you can do here, we have a bunch of tools in the platform through things like segmentation to segment your audience by whatever their different characteristics that make them up. So you might say, I want to segment users who came from Instagram, segment users who came from LinkedIn, people who came from ads, people who subscribed organically. The different kind of nature of each cohort. You want to see, these are just different ways you can break up your audience. From there, you can then have a little bit more insight into how each of these groups are performing. When we say engagement patterns, it could be, hey, I can see that when I break my audience up of paid versus people who I paid to subscribe versus organic subscribers, my paid subscribers perform in terms of open rate or click-through rate way worse than my free subscribers. And that can help you, okay, do I need to get better subscribers from my paid efforts? Am I reaching the right people? It just leads to these questions you can ask yourself and dig deeper. Also helps you understand content preferences. If you can say, okay, I can see that the most opens happen with specific types of content. That can be super helpful. User flow analysis. This is going to be the process of understanding how users are engaging with your platform. This is done through something like Google Analytics, which I believe we have a list of tools, but you can see, okay, users typically come to my site, they spend X amount of time on the site when they view 2 or 3 pages on average, or they maybe read 4 or 5 articles. Basically understanding like, what does user behavior look like when they're engaging with your content? You can modify that. Maybe you want to get people to read more content. You have calls to action to other pieces of content or internal linking. Maybe you want to get them to subscribe sooner. So maybe you implement our pop-ups or gating or something like that. Retention analysis is understanding how long your users stay engaged, which means typically opening or clicking a newsletter within a given month. And so understanding like how long you're retaining users. So they subscribe and then they presumably open an email. How long are you keeping them engaged? Again, through Google Analytics, you can do device and platform usage. So you can see how users are accessing your content through tools like Microsoft Clarity. You can look at your homepage or your subscribe page or an article, and you can see, okay, this is where users are moving their cursor in terms of spending time and dwelling. This is super valuable to say, okay, can I detect if maybe my call to action, my headline is confusing? So it's like taking people a second to read it and understand it. Or I can see that the header, the opening section to my newsletter, people are really spending a lot of time there before actually getting into the meat of the article. Maybe I should move that to somewhere else in the article if I want to optimize for people getting right into the meat and potatoes. And that kind of leads into A/B testing. I know some of these things sound a little bit intrusive, and I know perhaps media folks are maybe a bit more, sensitive around things like tracking and privacy considerations. I could be wrong about that. It's just my impression of the media landscape. But Jacob, what are your thoughts real quick around these types of ways of tracking users and analyzing behavior? Is this something that is familiar maybe in newsrooms or something that might be brand new to them?
No, I think this is actually pretty brand new territory. Yeah. There definitely is some amount of like skepticism around this stuff, but I think generally it's less skepticism on an ethical basis and more on like a unfamiliarity, just because there are marketers at big news or in big news corporations that do this stuff. They are doing these things. They just like separate church and state and keep it away from the people in the newsroom writing the content. But I think really part of having a successful newsletter as an individual, as a media individual, I think is putting your marketer hat a little bit on. Maybe that's the hat you were just wearing a minute ago, EJ, but the put your marketer hat on and start thinking a little bit about this stuff that you've never thought about in your career. And trial by fire, to the earlier point. Experimentation, try things, have a hypothesis, play it out, scientific method, the whole thing, and come back and take your analysis away and see what you did. Because I do think it's really important. And some newsletters are like, some people have platforms so big that they don't have to do any of that. It just like falls into place without them. But that's much more rare than people that I think really learn how to do this stuff and monetize successfully. Yeah,
I would say if this is the other thing I would say, so I have two thoughts. If this sounds super intimidating, then forget it. Don't focus on this to begin with. The most important parts are building that newsletter that's getting eyeballs and getting engagement. And that all comes before you want to do the more in-depth analytics. I couldn't tell you, actually, you'd be shocked at some of these huge newsletters, 100,000 million subscribers that are reaching out to us and they say, hey, we're interested in doing more analysis on our subscribers. And they would then ask me the most basic, what is the breakdown of where our subscribers are coming from? And they've grown to 1 million. And it's like, they're not tracking necessarily like where their subscribers are coming from because they haven't had to. They've maybe been growing so organically so well, or maybe they've really focused on paid and they haven't really cared about the other channels. But that is to say, if this sounds super intimidating, this is just one tool in the toolbox that can help you, but it's certainly not the type of thing that should stop you from diving in and just publishing and getting going. The punchline here, I went into a bunch of technical things, and this is one of the challenges that I have that I try to work on, is that the punchline for all of this is that all of these different tactics are solely in service of either identifying your users and identifying your readers and further nailing down your audience and doubling down and figuring out where to double down, and or driving greater engagement. That's what you're trying to do when you're deploying these things. You're trying to say, how can I better understand my audience? How can I better serve these users? And these are just different tactics and approaches that you can do to do that. So one of the super tactical things you can do with the newsletter is to set up a drip campaign that's going to nurture and warm up these subscribers as they come into your system. The one that we have here is like a sign up flow, very common. I'm sure everybody in this call has gotten one. You subscribe by default on our free plan. Everybody gets one autoresponder. It's just like, hey, you subscribe, thanks for subscribing, and you can add your content there. On our paid plans, we actually have a fully it's called automations. It's a full automation suite. But one thing here is you can do like a welcome series. So somebody signs up and they immediately receive the welcome email, and then you can schedule 2 days later, they get another email that presents a new topic, maybe shows them some of the greatest hits. And then the next one after that asks them a question about themselves or has a survey or something like that. But the idea here is you can use these very flexible automations builder to create custom journeys that are very much one-to-many. If you have common paths or actions that you want users to take, whether it's data collection or just more engagement, literally there's like an infinite number of ways you can use this. Your imagination is the limit. But we have some very straightforward ways in which you can automate some of the things that just create stronger engagement with your subscribers. Cool. Nurturing subscribers, that's kind of on a similar vein, very specific to kind of automations is the top line, and then nurturing subscribers would be one step down, like one of those ways to automate your process. So triggering users based on subscriber behavior, like when they sign up. You can also trigger things like when they go dormant. If it's been a month or two and they haven't opened or clicked an email, you can send them a message saying, hey, do you want to stay subscribed or should I unsubscribe you? Through a survey, you might ask about preferences and interests, and then you could potentially send a specific edition of your newsletter around those interests and so forth. Our last big section is around monetization. In the next slides, we have about 15 minutes left, and we have just a few slides left. So sponsorship opportunities. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. You all know about sponsorships. You all have been sponsored in a newsroom. You have your ad team sells sponsorships. And then on the site, you have either banner ads or you have whatever the sponsor looks like. In our case, we recommend these native ad formats where it's like you have the newsletter sponsored by whoever the sponsor is. And then deeper in the newsletter, there's like a blurb that feels very native. We have a built-in ad network where you can plug into our ad team who sources AAA household brand names like BetterHelp, Masterclass, HubSpot, Netflix, and way more. These are going to provide credibility to your newsletter. Famously, The Hustle, which was one of the biggest newsletters that sold to HubSpot, in the very early days, they created a fake advertisement saying that they were sponsored by Ford. And they had no relationship with Ford, but they said sponsored by Ford, and they had like blurb for an F-150 or whatever. And they did so because it made them look more legit. It made them look bigger than they actually were, because people said, oh, of course, if you're a giant newsletter, you're going to be sponsored by a big name brand. And it just adds that credibility. So one option is just you can use our ad network if you want to find your own sponsors. We have a couple different tips here around sponsorship tiers. You can have different plans like packages. I think we can provide some resources around here, but essentially tiers would just basically be, okay, maybe a bronze tier, you get them on a recurring monthly payment where they get one sponsorship a month. Silver tier is going to get one per week. And maybe gold tier is going to get, I don't know, premium placement for that once a week if you're sending weekly, or some other aspect of that. Setting rates, there's a bunch of research. It really depends on the topic, subject matter that you're going through. Rate setting would be a second part. So that's the actual rate that your subscribers are going to pay. And then understanding what ad placements you're going to offer. And so that kind of goes into that tier concept I was talking about. But you might have, your sponsored by section might be one placement. You might have then two your native content sections below, primary and a secondary, and you may sell them all as one unit, or you might sell them each as separate units. So maybe your primary gets the sponsored by, and your secondary unit's priced cheaper and gets the lower pricing. Paid subscriptions and memberships. Now, this again is probably pretty relevant for folks that are in newsrooms, especially in today's day and age. We've all seen those, the New York Times one where you're going and they want you to pay. You can replicate all of that functionality in beehiiv. You can have content that's only for your paid subscribers that literally when somebody hits the page, there's a paywall that says, hey, in order to view this content, you must be subscribed. There's literally inline paywalls where you can give them a preview. And then when they get to a certain part in the article, it'll then say, hey, in order to continue reading, you have to subscribe. We have an incredible number of subscription models. Jacob, you might want to talk a little bit about this. I know you've done a lot of work here, but bronze, silver, gold, one-time payments, donation-based premium subscriptions. We can offer paid plans. You can offer free trials. Literally, I think pretty much anything tools like Memberful or Patreon can do, you can manage from basically right here in your beehiiv account. And the biggest one is that we take 0% fee. So this is built into the platform. You're not going to get 10% of your revenue stolen for no reason. It's all yours. We also have obviously the ways that you can tie in with the automations tool to build in retention strategies, to build in upsell proper strategies. Right now we do support Stripe, but we have a bunch of different payment modalities. So you can do, if somebody comes to your site through an Apple device, they can do Apple Pay. We support global payments through credit cards and more. Jake, before we move on, I'd love for you to add some color with either the previous slide and the slide, or just this one itself.
Yeah, I think the opportunity here around combining your paid subscriptions with our automation features is really interesting. When I first joined, we had a journalist who had been in traditional media that was on the platform, and him and I set up a segment that was 80% of his, or people who read his work more than 80% of the time and were free. And you can build that segment relatively easy in beehiiv. And then we set up an automation and a coupon for a paid subscription that was like emailing them out every 30 days or whatever, and was like, hey, here's a coupon to sign up. And it was really effective in helping convert his most active free readers into paid readers. And so thinking about stuff like that and the opportunity here, people do value your work. And I think some people don't. I think some journalists and some independent publishers just don't think about the opportunity there is to incentivize people in that way. And to also, from an audience perspective, I don't think it's that people don't want to pay you. They may just not know that they can pay you. They may just not know that, they may just forget, and calling their attention to it's really helpful in one way or another. And so leveraging kind of the things we've gone over in the past few slides with segmentation and automation and paid subscriptions can be really helpful, because you might find that you can convert a lot of the people that are those your most valuable, most engaged free readers into paid readers. And yeah, I would say this is the paid subscriptions is the most consistent, and always has been, even for traditional media, it's the most consistent form of revenue. And thinking about your price point and everything else is really important, really valuable time as you think about how you can monetize what you're doing.
Love that. That's that's going to make a great soundbite and great content for after this, because that perfectly encapsulates so much of what we're trying to get across to folks. Cool. You can also, one of the other ways is one of the ways you can promote some of these things like premium subscriptions. You might have covered this a little bit just now, Jacob, but basically bundling different things to create more compelling offers. So when we talk about premium content offers, what is it that you're actually offering for these premium subscriptions? So traditionally, like New York Times, it's like you're getting just the journalism, you're getting the content. But when we're working in this context of beehiiv and as a creator, there's so much more you can offer. You can say, my premium subscribers are going to get the weekly newsletter and a second edition on Sunday, or they're going to get access to a community that you can connect with me directly, or premium subscribers get a offer like this, like we see on the screen here, where Lenny, product management influencer, partnered with Perplexity. So all of his subscribers got a free year of Perplexity Pro on him. And so, yeah, it really, the sky is the limit here. It's anything that is valuable that can be compelling to users. It could be early access. You give users early access to you're paying users early access, and then it gets published later on. It's really useful and valuable with things like video content and podcasts. If you're doing something like that, you can say, cool, if you're a paid user, I'm going to send you an unlisted link to the YouTube video, the report that I'm doing on YouTube or whatever on Wednesday, and everybody else is going to get it on Thursday or Friday. Jacob, do you have thoughts here? I know it's very similar to what we just talked about there, but like any other things that I missed in terms of what journalists might think about in terms of bundling and putting together premium offers?
My only advice is some advice I got from someone during my independent journey, which is, as you think about your audience and who they are, think about what they're willing to pay for, and then price it somewhere in between something that feels cheap and something that feels expensive. How much does like a Starbucks cup of coffee cost? Like now, if it's whipped up if it's a latte with some nice milk or whatever, oat milk or whatever in it, if that's $8 and that feels maybe a little expensive, a little too bougie, but like $6 feels too cheap, what's your number? It's $7. Like that. And odd numbers, for whatever reason, mentally somehow work with people differently is some advice I got that bore true. Pricing something on an odd number feels like less offensive to people. I don't know why. I don't know the full psychology of it, but I think it works. Mm-hmm. So yeah, as you think about what your price plan is and what your package looks like for premium, think about it that way. Think about something that is approachable and also use an odd number.
There's also, I will say, you can do this a little bit scientifically as well as you go through that process. Like one of the most genius ones that I saw, this startup, again, we can copy from the startup world to find out how to do this effectively. If you have a base of subscribers and you have an offering you have in mind, you could send a message to them that says essentially, hey, I'm launching this service. Here's a preview. Go take a look, click on it. Maybe you give them limited time free access. And then you follow up and say, basically something along the lines of, what price point would make this feel just like way too cheap that just you wouldn't believe it? Like it would feel too cheap. And then ask them for a number. And then the second question is like, what price point would you feel like you're getting a good deal? So too cheap being like it feels like it feels not credible. And then too cheap being like, what price point would you feel like it's just like very underpriced and you're getting a steal? But it's like a good offer. What price point do you think is like fair that you'd feel like, okay, this is worth the value? And then what price point would you think would be, this is overpriced and absurd and gouging or whatever? And so this was just a survey I received, and I can think about it through the product marketing and marketing lens. So I actually don't know what the results of that specific exercise were, but you can imagine that if you're collecting this feedback from, again, these audience users that are your best users, you can start to get an idea of placing where this price is. So you can say, okay, cool. If they say $5 would make this feel like a scam, you're obviously going to price it more than $5. If you say $8 would make it feel super, super cheap, okay, you want to go more than $8. You say the fair price would be, what they're willing to pay and not think twice about it. Maybe they say that's $10 and $20 would be just like out of the question, would feel absurd. Then that your pricing should probably be somewhere between $10 and $20, where you don't want it to just feel like, you want it to be somewhere between no-brainer, and obviously you don't want it to be too high overpriced that you're going to disincentivize people, but you don't want it to feel cheap. And that can really help specify, really get tuned into like where your pricing might land and end up. Cool. So last thing is affiliate marketing. This is one of the things that I think a lot of folks, maybe from the media space, that where content is a little bit more quote unquote pure, may not use as much. I could be totally wrong about it. Again, I'm not from that world, but affiliate marketing is basically if you sign up with something like Amazon affiliates, or there's a bunch of different platforms like Impact or PartnerStack or Rewardful. We use Rewardful, where companies are willing to pay in a very similar fashion to ads, where they're paying to get in front of your audience. But in the affiliate world, you get paid basically when a transaction or conversion occurs. In the case of Amazon, if you share an Amazon link to a product, you get a portion of that sale. And if it's a SaaS product, you might drop a link to a SaaS product and you get a kickback commission if that click leads to a sale. And so the key here is choosing the right affiliate network. So finding an affiliate network that has the right brands that you want to work with, one that's easy to use and that's going to get you the right offers. Making sure that you position the affiliate offers appropriately. It's really important that you make sure that your users understand like which offers you're getting rewarded for and maybe compensated for recommending versus ones that you might be making organically. It can really damage trust if people think you're making an organic recommendation and it turns out that you're making money from it. Understanding the commission structure. So whether you're going to get paid on a cost per click basis, there are some that you get paid just for clicks. There's some that you get paid for only conversions and everything in between. And again, I mentioned that disclosure, but positioning and disclosure are related in that way. But one of the things we see most commonly is like if you have your main story and you say, hey, here's some other things from around the web that you might appreciate. And you might have a little disclaimer say, these are affiliate links. There may be compensation associated with them. Just a small disclaimer. And then maybe the link to the product and why you're recommending it can work really well. Jacob, before we finish up this presentation, is this like something that folks in this world may be super familiar with, or something that they don't have a lot of experience with?
No, this is, I would say, primarily net new. Affiliate marketing, you're way more qualified to talk about it than me, given the fact that you run the partner program here, or did originally. But no, this is definitely something I think is very new to a lot of journalists and media in general, but extremely effective if you do it right.
Yeah, I would say the best way to think about this is basically an alternative to an ad or a supplement to an ad. It's basically an ad. That's how you want to think about the placement within your content. You want it to be framed in your own mind as this is some sort of ad that I'm offering to my users, and that will make sure that when you're positioning it, you're doing so in a way that's ethical and is providing the right disclosures. If you're like, for example, with beehiiv, lots of people are very happy with the service they get with beehiiv. They discovered beehiiv through word of mouth, and they had a great experience, fair price, value that they're getting from the platform. And they have an audience themselves, and they say, hey, I created a lot of success. I found a lot of success with beehiiv. I want to share it with you. But at the end of the day, they are sharing it, which takes up space in their newsletter, which relies on the credibility of their reputation. It's totally fair to be compensated for that type of recommendation. And we split in our affiliate program, we split 50-50 revenue, 50-50 for a year with anybody who refers a customer to us. So in that way, both the affiliate and we win, as well as the person being referred. And of course, if those alignments change, if somebody unsubscribes, then again, the commission ends and everyone's happy. And so in that way, it's nothing nefarious or like underhanded. You just are very clear. Hey, I love beehiiv. If you want to give it a shot, give it a shot. I may be compensated for this. With that being said, I think we're close to that end. I would love to get some feedback in the chat of how that was and maybe any other questions that folks might have. We got Jacob's got to leave. So if there's any questions that are journalist specific, I will take those and we'll add them to the post when we publish this recording. I do have one question about advice for cracking the growth ceiling after 30 to 40 subscribers. I'd say this really comes back to that initial conversation around really identifying your audience. If your audience is only those first level connections, that doesn't represent product market fit. That just means like these people were being nice and want to see what you are creating, but they're not subscribing based on the merit of the actual content itself, most likely. And so the key is really understanding how you can essentially let the content speak for itself and make that kind of sale, if you will, of them signing up and giving you their email. You need to get to a place where the content does that and it's not you doing that per se. I know that there's always an element if you're promoting on social media, it's yes, you are that brand. But what I mean is you can't infinitely scale just asking people to sign up for your newsletter. At some level, your newsletter, when people view it, they have to say, hey, I love this content. I want to get this. And it doesn't really, I don't have to necessarily know that I'm going to see Steve at the water cooler or see him at the barbecue next week and he's going to ask me if I subscribed. I really actually want to get this content. And the answer to the question is, how do you break that growth ceiling? I wouldn't really say that's a ceiling. I'd say you're, for all intents and purposes, really starting from square one still. And then from there, those initial 30 to 40 might be valuable for feedback if they are maybe professional contacts that are relevant potential users. And that can be nice to get that feedback early on. But I would also basically very strictly make sure that they are the right types of people that you're trying to get added to your list before you take that feedback. Very helpful. Okay. Do we have any more questions in the studio chat? Okay. Nope. No more questions. All right. Well, thank you so much for those who stayed with us for this whole hour and a half. I hope this was useful. Again, we'll have the recording out in a few days and you can review it. We'll also be chopping up some of the content for social media. So if you see that, feel free to give us a share and a comment. As you guys progress on your journey, if this was useful, we have a community that is open to our paying beehiiv users called the Hive. We have about 12.5 channels for things like cross promotions, design, people asking for design advice, growth advice, sharing milestone celebrations, monetization tactics, general newsletter feedback, all kinds of stuff. It's a community of nearly 3,400 active paying beehiiv users, professional newsletter publishers who are always happy to provide advice. There's dozens or hundreds of messages a day. It's very active. So if this was useful, you don't want to wait till the next webinar. I highly recommend checking out the Hive. You'll get an invite once you upgrade your account to one of our paid plans. And aside from that, I want to thank you for sticking with us. Whether you're listening on the recording in the future or you're here live, you make this worth it. You make this all worth it. I wouldn't be here speaking to an empty room if it weren't for you. And so I'm very appreciative. I want to thank Jake, who's not here any longer. And I want to thank Tony, who's sat in the producer seat for the last hour and a half, keeping track and sharing great documentation. A little round of applause for him. But thank you so much for your time. Have a great day. We look forward to serving you in beehiiv and seeing what you have to build. Thanks so much.